and you can assume a lot, but it isn't true. Like I could assume my dog's a genius and he's going to start talking to you in a few minutes. But that doesn't mean it's reality. It's going to happen.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today we're going to talk about the economy and the election of Donald Trump and what that all meant. And as we look at the numbers of the Trump's election that have rolled in, we can see clearly there was a low turnout in this election. In fact, Trump got less votes than in the election where he actually lost, and so the previous election. And we know that there's a lot of reasons people didn't turn out to the polls or turned out to the polls and voted for third parties or voted for him as a protest, including Palestine and many other issues. But one thing that's come across is that the economy was a critical factor in Trump's victory and people's perceptions of what he might do to turn things around. And our guest today is Professor Masao Suzuki, who's a professor of economics who just recently retired about a year ago after 35 years of teaching and doing research in economics. He's also not just an economist, although he's a prominent economist, but he's an activist as well, and has been active in since 1970 in the student community, workplace, and the community that he lives in. Currently, he's involved in immigrant rights activism as well. So, welcome to Fight Back Radio, Masao.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
Yes, and I want to start the interview with a discussion about inflation, because a lot of American workers voted for Trump, and in Trump on the campaign trail reached out to the working classes. He even called it and said blaming Biden for inflation, and so I want to ask you about. Was this a legitimate thing for Trump to be raising, and are his proposed policies or what he said on the campaign trail things that were likely to fix this?
Well, that's a very good question, Richard. The fact of the matter is that dissatisfaction with the economy and with inflation in particular drove about 8 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 not to vote for Harris last month. Now, only maybe about 2 million of those 8 million ended up voting for Trump. So the vast majority just didn't vote for president or voted third party, as I did, for example. It is true that while the rate of inflation, the way we measure how fast prices are going up, has gone down substantially. It had a peak of 9% in June of 2022, and this is the highest rate of inflation since about the early 1980s, and it did decline to only 2.6% the last month we have data on, which would be October of this year. But still, 2.6% was higher than under Trump's first term, and there was no, spike in inflation in his first term. So Trump really hammered Biden and then Harris on this issue. But in reality, the policy proposals he has are more likely to raise prices than to lower them.
Yeah. So, I get the anger that workers have, and even as you mentioned, as inflation has come down, it's that doesn't mean that they got all their buying power back, and so people's bank accounts that have been emptied during this time period are not filling up again. So I get the anger about that. But let's dig in a little bit to Trump's policies and why you don't think that what he says is going to work is going to work. One of the key things that he has said is that he's going to raise tariffs, and I love tariffs. Trump is famous for having said, and I remember when some of these trade agreements, the North American Free Trade Agreement being prominent. We were, some of the protectionism we were hoping to defend jobs here and in other countries, and we had alliances across the board. Why is why don't we just say, okay, yeah, Trump's right, we support tariffs, and you said it's not going to reduce inflation. Why is that?
Actually, Richard, if you don't mind, I'll get back to tariffs and spend, probably most of this interview on that. But I actually, it's my own interest what I'm involved with now. I did want to start with Trump's plans for deportations, because he's said that he wants to deport all the undocumented immigrants, and he's hinted at canceling temporary visas, the DACA, the youth who were brought here as children, and temporary protective status, TPS, that has been given to people who are fleeing natural disaster and war and political repression. Example of that is many Haitians fled here after a massive earthquake. Over 100,000 people died, and I'm probably understating it. And the country never recovered from that. So what happened is that there was a big surge in immigration a couple years ago. Record numbers of people were fleeing gang and drug cartel violence in Mexico and Central America and Haiti, government repression in Central America, and also economic deprivation heightened by U.S. economic sanctions, for example, in Cuba and Venezuela, and also by the effects of climate change, which most of the Central American countries their economies are mainly agricultural, and of course they're mainly low-lying countries bordering on the Gulf of Mexico, and so they've been, just as the U.S. has been hit hard. We had two big hurricanes this year, Helene and then Milton, but Central America and southern Mexico have also been hit hard. And so anger around the record numbers of immigrants. Trump has, he's long called for closing the borders, which in effect the Biden administration has done. But then he sort of transferred these feelings to call for the deportations of all the undocumented. Now, he actually tried to do this in his first term, but he got a lot of pushback, even from not only from Democrats, but from his own, the Republican Party. But one of the differences today in his second term is the Republican Party has pretty much been thoroughly, I'm not sure this is a word, but magnified. Excuse me, 1 second. My dog is sort of needy and needs to sit by me while I'm talking.
That's nice. Go on.
But anyway, it's been thoroughly magnified, so I really doubt there'll be much, if any, opposition from the Republicans, who do now have majorities in the House and Senate. And so this effort would tear apart about 6 million families that include 6 million US born children that are US citizens, and of course, millions of legal resident or citizen spouses in these families. And in response to this fact, the proposed ICE director, Tom Holman, has says, well, we'll deport them too, right? And so what is called a deportation scheme is actually a massive ethnic cleansing, mainly of Mexicans and Central Americans and other Latinos here in the United States. So beyond the humanitarian aspects of this, which would be unprecedented in US history, this would have a big impact on the economy. And so while undocumented immigrants are only about 3% of the total population, they're about 5% of the workforce. And that's because there's relatively few undocumented children and undocumented seniors, right? There's no reason for seniors to try and come into the US. And in particular, industries and jobs, the undocumented are a much larger proportion of the workforce. So in agriculture, as much as 18% of the agricultural workforce is undocumented. And this is even concentrated again in the jobs like picking the actual fruits and vegetables that we eat. And so while some parts of the agriculture workforce, the people who plow and spread the fertilizer and, et cetera, and spread pesticides might be fewer, that means there's more people actually doing the day-to-day work. And actually 13% of food manufacturing workers are estimated to be undocumented. It's one of the highest industries that have a lot of undocumented workers. And, if you take like 20% of the agricultural workforce away, that's going to be a huge shock on agriculture, on food production. And the thing is, most Americans recognize this is not a job out there in the fields, in the heat and the sun and cutting fruits and vegetables by hand. This is not a job that most native-born Americans want or would do at any price. And so there would be basically a big loss of production. And this, of course, would result in a less supply and higher food prices, which is one of the complaints people have about the price of groceries. And then it would also affect food manufacturing, because a lot of food, is processed here. So this in particular, for example, meat packing has a lot of undocumented immigrants, because meat packing, slaughtering cows and pigs in particular, it's cold because they keep it semi-refrigerated, it's dirty, and it's dangerous too. It's a very high injury rate. And again, it's not something that you're going to see Americans, native-born Americans, want to do. And so again, you'd have these shortages and higher meat prices. Another industry with a lot of undocumented workers is in construction. Again, not so much the skilled trades, but in the laborers, in roofers. And again, shortages of labor would tend to mean fewer homes and drive up. Fewer homes would be built, and apartments also, and this would drive up housing prices and rents, which is already a big, problem for a lot of people. So while I feel that the main, problem with his immigration policy is the humanitarian side and tearing apart families and the sort of racial ethnic cleansing side, but it would have a big economic impact.
Yeah, let me follow up on that a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, clearly it's morally repugnant, but it's I think beyond that. So you know you're saying that because of the scarcity of labor that's created by these deportations, that you know there would be you know upward pressure put on, especially the industries you mentioned and food production. Why isn't I mean not just in those industries, but wherever there's undocumented workers, they tend to be low wage workers, and there's the profit made by the rich people, and you know I've often you know looked at the Republicans as a party of the rich. Why don't why do they want to do this? Why is Trump able to have all these gazillionaires give them all this money to deport people when lots of money is being made off of their labor?
Well, one of the things is that people believe, not totally without reason, that their support for Trump will mean that he'll make exceptions for them. And in fact, I think his effort to, if he indeed he did try and deport massive numbers of undocumented agricultural workers, the pressure on him from farmers would lead to, you know, some modification of that, or yeah. So I think that's their belief. Now, whether he actually comes through on that, that's more a matter of, excuse me, a matter of faith. The other thing I know for farmers is one of the things they want, especially here in California, is they want more water. And so rather than dealing with, you know, the climate-induced droughts that are affecting our state and other states too, for example, the Colorado River, all the states along it, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, are all being affected. Rather than actually dealing with that, they want to have just more water given to them. But again, it's not sustainable. They also want to stop limits on drilling for water. I mean, so much water has been sucked out in the Central Valley here in California that the actual level of the land has often subsided in feet, not inches. And so it's buckling roadways, damaging canals and buildings. But again, it's sort of like they want their water for the short term, and there's no real thought to the long term sustainability.
Yeah. So let me turn to a little bit to the working class people then though too. I mean Trump was successful with sections of the working class at saying, look, your problems are these immigrants, and they repeatedly talked about all whatever you mentioned some of it here earlier already, but that by deporting all these folks that'll solve their economic woes as well. And I mean, you pointed out that this could potentially be inflationary, but besides being morally beyond the pale, is this going to help the people that are left behind, the whatever people that are citizens, because there's job shortages? Won't they be able to make more money or get more jobs or things like that?
I think there'll be a little bit of that, but the fact of the matter is, many of these jobs, people really, native-born Americans really don't want to work, even at higher wages. And so, like you take agriculture and meat packing, there's a long history of using different press nationalities, Chicanos here, more on the Southwest, African Americans in the South using them in the fields. And the only time there were really a lot of white farm workers was during the Great Depression, when you had a combination of the Depression, which hit farmers really hard, and then the Dust Bowl in the Midwest that drove a lot of internal migration. And so, in fact, one of my relatives, in-law, his family is from one of the people who left Arkansas during the Great Depression. But that's really the only time you found a lot of native-born white labor in the agricultural workforce. And, I don't think many African Americans want to go back to the fields. That was part of the Great Migration out of the South. I mean, most of it was because of the severe, racism and discrimination, the Jim Crow that they faced. But part of it is, agricultural farm work has never been fun. People have been that was one of the things that with the development of cities is people move to the cities because they think life is better, and in many ways there are more opportunities in the cities. And so I don't think people, and most Americans, polls have showed most Americans agree with this. I think part of what's driving it, what's unsaid, is this big wave of immigration has really changed the racial composition in the United States. And there is a lot more Latinos and Asians in particular, and also growing numbers of Black immigrants from the Caribbean and from Africa and from Britain, for example. And some of that, I think, is also, I think people feel like things are changing too long. I mean, I've seen it. I don't have a problem with it, but I've seen it. There was a mainline Protestant church right across the street from my elementary school. I walked by it on my way. I walked by it every day on my way to school for 12 years because I'd go to my elementary school, and then my middle school, I'd walk by it as further away, and then my high school, I'd walk by it. And then, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I was going up to, I started seeing my parents more to help out. And it changed from a Protestant church to a Buddhist monastery. I'm seeing these orange-robed Buddhists, Asian Buddhists, out in front of it. And so I was like, wow, this is different. And then even more, there's a strip mall that I would often go to on my way home from work, go grocery shopping, and there was a Starbucks there, right? And then no more Starbucks. It had turned into one of these boba tea joints. And I was like, whoa, you're displacing Starbucks. Oh, wow. And again, I don't drink boba tea. My daughter does, or did. But still, that kind of changes. I think some people might also be, just change is not always comfortable for people.
Yeah, yeah. I want to circle back to the inflation issue here a little bit, and I know for decades the Republican Party said that the main cause of inflation was that the Democrats were big spenders and they were creating these large deficits, and too much money was being spent on welfare or in whatever health insurance, whatever it was, and then the other side of the other side of deficits, besides spending, which is probably mostly military, but is taxes. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Trump's history as president and what he's likely to do in the next term in terms of deficits and taxes, and whether that would make a difference on inflation, and maybe also how that compares to the Biden administration.
Okay. Well, again, I'm sorry, I keep wanting to divert to what I want to talk about. I want to go back to your original question about tariffs. Okay,
Okay.
because Trump, he's called himself the tariff man. He said that it's the best, most beautiful word in the dictionary, and so he definitely does like tariffs. And I think the way that I look at this is actually not just Trump's policy, but it represents sort of a big change in the sort of the rulers of America and their view of the world. Okay. So following World War II, the United States was basically the capitalist economic superpower, because the other major capitalist economies, Britain, Germany, Japan, and France, had all been devastated by the war. Maybe I should add Italy in there too. And being, the top dog in the capitalist world, the U.S. pursued a free trade policy, much like the way Britain did in the 19th century, where the British economy was the most powerful. British technology, especially in textiles, in railroads, in mining, were like a leading edge. And so Britain went over to free trade starting in about the 1840s and became a champion of it, because they used their goods to, basically batter down the walls of other countries of any resistance. And the U.S., as the U.S. emerged as the number one economy after World War II, it also pursued a free trade policy, first with what was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and then later that became the World Trade Organization. And these two organizations were dedicated to lowering tariffs or taxes on imports and other barriers to foreign trade and also foreign investment. But just as Britain declined, the U.S. also declined in following World War II. U.S. alone produced 40% of the world's GDP, or gross domestic product, which is a measure of all the goods and services produced in an economy. And today it's producing 20% or less of GDP. So its relative economic power has been cut at least in half. It doesn't mean the US economy is smaller, it's not, but it means the rest of the world has grown much, much faster than the United States. So our share of the economic pie, world economic pie, has shrunk. And this is even more true in terms of manufacturing. So let's look at car manufacturing, which for the 20th century was like the epitome of manufacturing and of American leadership, right? So we have the famous Ford mass production of cars, et cetera, et cetera. There is a statement by some cabinet member who is chairman of GM, do you see a conflict? And he said, oh, no, there's no conflict. What's good for General Motors is good for America. So there's this identity. So right after World War II, 1950, the US was producing 5 times as many cars as the other major capitalist countries combined, Britain, Germany, France, and Japan combined. Now, by about 1963, their economies had recovered, and they were together producing as many cars as the United States. And then actually by 1975, the Japanese car industry had taken off, and they were actually producing more cars than the United States. And maybe not many of our listeners will remember the talk of the Japanese invasion, and stuff like that, with all of these Japanese cars coming in. And then the Japanese also built factories here in the United States. So, in fact, I'm on my fifth Honda Civic. And most people think of Honda as a Japanese car, or they assume it's from Japan. But my fourth Honda Civic, which my daughter has right now and is washing in our driveway, is actually Canadian born, Canadian made in a Canadian factory. And my car, my fifth Honda Civic, is actually made in the United States now. And so I'm driving for the first time in my life an American-made car. So I'm just a Honda fan. That's not for everybody. My wife's a Toyota person. It's fun to judge people by what they drive. Well, actually, maybe if you drive a Tesla, I'll be sort of like, and that's not so much a car. That's like judging Elon Musk. So personally, I would never buy a Tesla. And then actually in 2005, China surpassed both the United States and Japan as the leading producer of cars. And in 2020, they made more than twice as many cars as the United States. So again, it's a relative decline of the United States, both as other capitalist economies grew, and then most recently, as socialist China's economy has really boomed. And so there's been two responses in the ruling circles about this relative decline. So one response, and this was of the Biden administration, was to really try and boost US manufacturing, especially in high-tech areas, in making silicon chips. And this was in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. So that reflects, again, the Biden administration knew people didn't like inflation, so they labeled it. But really, it was for huge subsidies for manufacturers, American manufacturers, Japanese, Korean, et cetera, to produce more in the United States. So that's one school which was defeated in the last election. The other tendency, represented by Donald Trump, was to basically throw off tariffs or taxes on imports that would provide a protective wall around the US economy and around US manufacturing. And so he's proposed 10% tariffs on the whole world and 60% tariffs on China. And more recently, he sort of tried to mix it up by proposing 25% tariffs on imports on Canada and Mexico, and then immediately 10% more tariffs on goods from the United States. So this is definitely a big turn from the free trade policy in the past. But the fact of the matter is tariffs are a type of tax on production and sale of goods. And so, as you know, if sales taxes go up, if your state raises sales taxes, that's going to tend to raise the prices of the goods that are taxed. And not only that, but in some cases, many cases, but I know one very clear one. What happens is that the American companies that are competing with the imports will raise their taxes too. I mean, not taxes, will raise their prices too. And so, for example, when Trump put 25% tariffs on steel during his first term, US steelmakers raised their prices, which weren't affected by these tariffs. They were made, steel made here in America. They raised it by 22%, meaning there is almost no cost advantage to US made steel, but that would be like an automatic big boost in profits, right? So a lot of the big corporations, they're not interested in producing more here. They're interested in maximizing their profits. The other, the tariffs that Trump put about high tariffs on about half of all Chinese imports, and the U.S. trade deficit with China did get smaller, but the overall trade deficit got bigger. Why? Because what happened is companies and a lot of the trade from China, maybe a little less so now, but in the beginning, it was most of the trade from China was from US or European or Japanese companies offshoring their production to China and then exporting the goods and services to the United States. And this is also very widespread. So, for example, not China, but in terms of refrigerators, when I bought my first refrigerator, that was like, I can't remember. It was many, many years ago. I remember it was 93. I graduated from grad school and I got my first professional job, and we moved out of our little rented condo and rented a house. And so we bought a refrigerator. And the refrigerators I looked at were all made in Kentucky, all made in the United States. I don't remember the brand. And then when that broke after like 17 years, so that's a good run for an appliance, we went out and looked, and the sort of low, middle priced refrigerators were all imported. And the one we ended up buying was a Frigidaire, but it's not an American company anymore because Frigidaire was bought by Electrolux, which is one of the world's largest appliance makers based in Sweden. And the refrigerator was made in Mexico. So here you have a refrigerator made in Mexico, owned by a Swedish company with an American brand name on it, right? Yep. And so this kind of multinational corporation producing in one country and selling in another country, and they're based in a third country, is actually very common. That's like my Honda Civic. Honda's a Japanese company. They have a plant not my Honda Civic, sorry. My daughter's Honda Civic. And they're a Japanese company. They have a plant in Canada, and they're selling it into the United States. And of course, the biggest example, again, this is not, I always say this to my classes, this is not a product. In fact, I use the example so much, I'm like, they should pay me. But of course, you can't see it with my background. There you go. This ubiquitous iPhone, as well as other cell phones, they're made in China, but they're not made by Chinese companies. They're made by Apple, or for example, Samsung makes a lot of phones, but they're a Korean company and they're producing in China. So anyway, so what happened is these big multinationals, they started moving production out of China into other countries. And so you had like imports from Vietnam boom like 60% in the first year of the Trump tariffs. And it's like, and so again, production wasn't coming back to the US. It was just being shifted to other countries.
Well, the other side of this too, let me ask you is, so that's interesting. So it's like if you do a tariff on one country, they can just move the production to another country and not necessarily bring it back here. But also, if you do tariffs on Chinese goods or whatever, as you said, it's inflationary because it's a tax, and that could be inflationary. But wouldn't China or the countries that are victims of U.S. tariffs retaliate by doing their own tariffs and cut U.S. exports and make them less desirable for Chinese consumers or whatever country that is?
Right. So that's the thing, and it really affects U.S. workers because, first of all, you end up with a higher price goods imports. But then, for example, because one of the ways China retaliated is they really almost totally stopped buying U.S. soybeans. Right? China is a big importer, the world's biggest importer of soybeans, and they were, well, right now I think they're getting about 40% of the U.S. soybean crop is being sold to China. And so what China did is it switched to Brazil, right? And so that caused a massive hit on U.S. farmers. And then so the Trump administration ended up spending close to $20 billion bailing out the farmers. And of course, where's that money come from? Well, it's our tax money, you know. And so anyway, we end up paying for the tariffs sort of twice. And that's the thing is we are a major exporter too. And so countries can retaliate. And, you know, Trump made a statement. This was back from 2015, 2016. He's like, trade wars are good and easy to win. So the good part is a judgment call. So I don't want to argue with Mr. Trump on that. But easy to win is like, well, it sort of depends on, like other wars, who you're fighting. So like when the U.S. invaded Grenada and overthrew the government there, that was easy. I think we might have had one casualty, but you know, Grenada's a country of 300,000 people. It's smaller than the city I live in or the city you live in,
Yeah.
right? And the thing is, some of the economies that Trump was taking on, like China, like the European Union, and even Canada and Mexico, are not small countries. They're not like, I don't want to diss Grenada, but they're going to put up a lot more resistance, and that's what they did. And they used it very selectively. They targeted products, like they targeted Harley Davidson because it was being made at a plant where the former Republican speaker, do you remember his name? The guy from Wisconsin or Michigan?
Well, Harley Davidson's Wisconsin. I know that, but I'm not sure who you're referring to right now.
So much turnover. It's the House of.
Oh, yes, I do remember. I'm losing it though. I'm sorry.
But that's okay. And then they also hit Jim Beam whiskey, which is made in the state that the then Senate Republican Senate leader was from. So
yeah, Mitch McConnell, I think. Yeah. From Kentucky. Yeah.
Selective. Even the China's thing on the soybeans is selective because Trump has a lot of support among farmers. So they're like, okay, you like this guy, we're going to hit you back there. And so, both, anyway, so that's true. It's not like a small country that would have a hard time retaliating.
Well, let me ask you, it seems that some of this is bluster on Trump's part. I mean, the Mexico, Canada, we're going to have 25% tariffs on everything unless they fix their immigration policy. I mean, it struck me that might be, certainly got their attention. The new president of Mexico made a call, and the prime minister of Canada went to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump. But it struck me that this is maybe just trying to renegotiate trade agreements and trying to look at NAFTA or whatever, and that this really isn't about the rhetoric that he's using. It's more about him trying to improve the advantage that the U.S. corporations have in trade with those two countries.
Yeah. No, I certainly agree with this latest 25%. I mean, the people I talk to, their first response is, "Oh, that's crazy." But I agree. It'd be crazy to actually do that because the fact of the matter is US companies are deeply embedded in Canada and Mexico. And so, for example, the two US car makers, General Motors and Ford, they don't produce any sedans in the United States anymore. All they produce are pickups and SUVs, but they do still have sedans, but they're made in Canada or even more in Mexico. And then even more of their part supplies are coming from those two countries. So it would really tear up the auto industry. It would be and so I do agree that part of it, well, part of it is I think Trump really doesn't support the whole concept of NAFTA, or now the, what is that, US Mexico Canadian agreement. So he's trying to weaken it. So that's part of it. And part of it, I think, is, Trump, one thing he's actually good at, he's a showman, right? He's in a popular TV show. And basically, part of what he was, like he was saying, well, I'm going to put 25% tariffs on Canadian imports until they stop the flow of drugs and undocumented immigrants, he used another word, into the United States. Well, the fact of the matter is there's almost no drugs, right? Canada is not a place where you manufacture or you can grow, pot or coca leaves or cocaine. It's just not. And so part of what I think he's doing is Trudeau, Prime Minister, made a big show of coming here, and Trump's going to declare victory. He's going to say, oh, yes, the Canadians have agreed to do that. And look, there's almost no drugs or undocumented immigrants coming from Canada now. Well, that's true, but it was also true before Trump got elected. So part of it, I think, and one will never know, is showmanship, right? He's going to claim easy victories because in fact, the problem doesn't exist. In that.
Yeah. Okay, well, that makes, I mean, that's, I don't know if it makes sense, but it's consistent with what I see of Trump as well. Let me circle back to this question of inflation, though, and the issue about deficit spending and tax policy and some of that, and how how and how much revenue comes into the U.S. federal budget through taxes and how it's spent is critically important to all kinds of aspects of our economy. But the Republicans historically, and less so more recently, have said that this is the cause of inflation. And could you comment? As an economist, I'm sure you've looked at this and have an opinion. What is this? What is the deal with the deficits, and where are we at with that? Why is the rhetoric? Why is there so much less talk about it?
Well, there's two things. I mean, one is that the budget deficit is not really. Most economists don't feel it has the biggest direct impact on inflation, and you can just look at it historically. When did we have the most recent boom in the size of the budget deficit? Was in the 2020 recession that was combined with the COVID pandemic and a lot of stay-at-home orders. And so both taxes went down, and then spending to help people who were out of work and not getting paid really boomed. And so that was the budget deficit. Actually, hold on a second. Oh, wait a moment. No, I have it right here. Where was oh yeah, it opened up to be about $3 trillion, right? That's the biggest budget deficit as a relation, excuse me, dog's back. He's a little fickle. You come and go, Mr. Hank. And falling over or passing out or falling asleep. I'm just actually reaching for the dog because for some unknown reason he wants his rubs, but he doesn't want to sit near me. What was I going to say? So you have this huge budget deficit, $3 trillion, and yet prices actually, the inflation went to zero during that time because the economy was in the pits. And so it's really more the state of the economy. The unemployment rate will tend to have more impact on inflation. There is a general relationship that higher unemployment generally translates into lower inflation, and vice versa. Lower unemployment translates into higher inflation. And this is true over time. And it's also true if you look at different areas in the US. Up until recently, the Bay Area where I live has generally had a much lower unemployment than the rest of the country on average, and higher inflation than the rest of the country. And so that actually has a bigger impact on inflation than the budget deficit. Okay, that's what I would say. Now, in terms of the budget deficit, the two big drivers of it are economic recessions or depressions. And so it wasn't really long enough to be a depression, but given the unemployment rate went to like close to 20%, I mean, that's depression level unemployment. Now,
Yeah. Yes.
true, it only lasted a month or two. So I don't think anybody's calling it a depression, but that kind of thing really blows a big hole in the budget deficit. And then the other thing are wars. Like the other time we had the biggest budget deficit was during World War II. So that's really the origins of a lot of our national debt, the money that the government borrowed to pay for a budget deficit and didn't pay back was first the Great Depression and then World War II. But what's been happening ever since the 80s is we've started a new tendency towards tax cuts as federal government policy. Before the 80s, there was really never a big policy about it, but it started under Reagan. And because of this so-called budget issue, budget deficit issue, they started the, what you might want to call little lie, I might call that, of arguing that, cutting taxes will actually bring in more taxes because it'll cause the economy to boom, right? And so that didn't happen in the 80s. We got a bigger budget deficit under Reagan, and it didn't happen under Bush, cut taxes a number of times, and it didn't happen under Trump. Every single time you cut taxes, you get less tax revenues, and the budget deficit goes up. That's just a fact, and you can assume a lot, but it isn't true. Like I could assume my dog's a genius and he's going to start talking to you in a few minutes, but that doesn't mean it's reality is going to happen. Now, another big, you mentioned the military. In fact, the military is the single largest program being paid for by our income tax dollars. And so it's when you count the military and veteran spending, it's close to, and also there's other military spending in the Department of Energy for atomic weapons and stuff. It comes to about $1.3 trillion. Okay, so that's the single biggest program being paid for by income taxes. And then the second biggest one, unfortunately, is interest on the debt, which is almost $1 trillion this year. And it's really gone up because the Federal Reserve's inflation fighting policy is to jack up interest rates, so interest costs go up. There's a lot of, you'll see more of it, a lot of people, especially on Wall Street, trying to blame Social Security and maybe Medicare for the budget deficit. But the fact of the matter is, only in the last 4 years has Social Security been running a deficit because it has its own taxes, and in all of you who are working, you can look on your paycheck and there's a line item deduction saying Social Security, right? And then you don't see it necessarily, but your employer matches that. So those are two funding streams. And up until 4 years ago, there was actually a surplus. They were more Social Security taxes were coming in than were being paid out in benefits. And so this surplus has built up to a $2.7 trillion trust fund. And that's the trust fund, which now is being drawn down. And it's being drawn down at a relatively small amount, about $40 billion a year recently, and it will go up. That's true. But the overall budget deficit is like 45 times bigger than that, right? And this $40 trillion is coming out of the trust fund. So, well, why do they keep blaming Social Security? Well, that's because Wall Street, and one of the Wall Street billionaires, in fact, set up this foundation with like $1 billion in funding to, quote, educate people about Social Security, because what they want, and this is a very widespread view among younger people, even younger activists, is Social Security won't be there for me when I retire, okay? And that is just not true. It's just not true. It's a big lie, because what they want to do is get you to believe that Social Security won't be there, so then you'll give it up. And then where will your retirement savings go? It'll go to Wall Street, right? So they'll make money off of your savings, if you're able to save, which a lot of people aren't. The other thing, in fact, Elon Musk has been placed in charge of this so-called government efficiency program, or they call it DOGE, D-O-G-E, is that if they really want to make big cuts, and Trump has said he doesn't want to cut Social Security or Medicare, which it's not that I believe him, but that would blow a big hole in his base, is that the thing they're going to go after is Medicaid, which is health insurance for low-income families. Now, there's only about half as much money being spent on Medicaid, even less than half, as the military, but they're not going to cut the military, even though that's what I would do, because, you know, we have world's biggest army, Navy, Air Force, nuclear weapons all over the world. And
you're a socialist.
You have to be a socialist, but I'm just anti-imperialist.
Yeah,
we
fair point.
All over the world. And you know, I read the Wall Street Journal. I have a subscription to it. And at least they speak the truth. There are week after week major articles about preparing for war with China, right? And the need to spend more money in opinion pieces and so forth. But they're not going to cut that. Instead, they're going to come after Medicaid and maybe other social programs. You know.
Well, go ahead. Let me ask you about. I wanted to pivot to this question. You talked about war with China, and it looks to me, you know, we've had Mick Kelly and some others on here talk about foreign policy, but I wanted to talk about the economics a little bit. You mentioned about how the U.S. is a declining economic power relative to other countries, and you use the examples of auto and other things that are no longer produced here, and things that are just in terms of the size of the economies, and so China is now close to the United States in terms of size of its economy, and the thing is that they're not just a rival to the United States. They're organizing with other countries around their own economic interests as well. And so this BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now a number of other countries have been added to this, have been meeting to talk about how to further their economic interests. And could you talk a little bit about Trump and how he as a leader of the United States, and how they are looking to deal with economic issues that are being organized against them, how they use the U.S. dollar possibly, and some other things, and what's actually the fight that's going on here, and how does it affect people like us?
Well, there's two things. One is that the use of the dollar as basically what's called an international reserve currency. That is money that foreign central banks will hold in order to finance trade with other countries. So, for example, for a long period of time, and I think still to today, if Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, say, that the Japan would convert its Japanese yen into US dollars and then pay dollars to Saudi Arabia, which would then convert it into the Saudi currency, which maybe I should know, but I've forgotten. And so a lot of countries do this. They use the dollar as an intermediary to trade with. And so they hold large amounts of US dollars. And so it is true that the percentage of foreign currencies held by central banks around the world has fallen. The dollar has fallen from about 70% to 55% now. So it's still a majority, but it's not as big a majority as, say, 25 years ago. And there's two main reasons for this. One is the development of the euro, the common European currency, because previously European countries, even like if France and Germany wanted to trade, France could buy US dollars and then pay Germany in dollars, which would then convert it into Deutschmarks. Now, there's no need to do that. It's all done in euros. Another reason, which is probably smaller but growing more quickly, is countries using the Chinese renminbi or RMB. And this is also expanded with China's expanding trade to the rest of the world. So, some people might get the misunderstanding that China mainly trades with the United States. In fact, China trades more with the rest of Asia than it does with the United States. And of course, it has major trade with, it trades more with Africa than the US does, and also with Latin America than the US does. And so a lot of what China's been trying to do is not use the dollar as an intermediary, but just trade directly. So I think they made this agreement with Saudi Arabia recently, where they would just swap. I think the Saudi currency is the rial. I'm not sure, but they just swap the RMB for the Chinese currency. Or let's not. Yeah, I'm sorry. They would swap the RMB for the Saudi currency and then pay the Saudis in their own currency for the oil that they import from them. And some other countries are doing this more. And so the percentage of dollars has dropped. My opinion is, though, that this has been definitely a long-term trend. I think it's going to continue. I think Trump, and actually even some people on the left, because I get asked about it, and I'm like, well, it's not that big a deal. I think it's, at this point, it's made out to be more than it really is. I could be wrong, but I think it's just going to continue a long-term decline, and it really doesn't matter as much as the decline the overall relative decline of the U.S. dollar and I'm not sorry, I just said that. The overall relative decline of the U.S. economy and manufacturing in particular.
Well, let me ask about other aspects of BRICS and of trade agreements and whatever that that the United States is what Trump is trying to affect and Biden as well, maybe through military efforts or other things as well. I mean, there's been certainly the United States has used sanctions to punish countries that it politically disagrees with effectively, and have been able to bully, allies or clients, countries into doing it. And we see this with Venezuela and Cuba, North Korea, countries like that. I mean, why is BRICS and maybe the Belt and Road Initiative of China as well? Why are these things significant in terms of economics?
I think the BRICS. Well, I think the BRICS and the Belt and Road are sort of distinct. They're interrelated, but they're distinct. So the BRICS are basically an effort of developing economies, which China is still a developing economy, even though the overall size of the economy is larger than the United States. But you have to remember, China has almost 4 times as many people as the United States. So the amount of production per person is certainly far behind the United States. So it's still developing, and they're making real progress. Like they eliminated extreme poverty, but that doesn't mean there's no poor people in China. I mean, the analogy I use is if we eliminated homelessness, right? And that certainly would be a great improvement to society, but that doesn't, eliminating homelessness and eliminating poverty are not the same thing, right? Because before the mass phenomenon of homelessness that really started in the 80s, there was still millions of people in the US living in poverty. So China still has a lot of development to go. So I think the BRICS is basically all these developing economies. And interestingly enough, Russia can be sort of considered a developing economy in some ways. It's really dependent. On one hand, it's still a military, well, at least nuclear superpower, right? Because it has far more nuclear weapons than anybody than the United States, and it can sort of match the United States. But in other ways, the economy is the fall of socialism in the Soviet Union really devastated the economy, and then the breakup of the Soviet Union. And so in some aspects, Russia is like a developing country. And so it's really an attempt to build more solidarity among the developing countries. And that's where China, one of the reasons they're able to trade so much, is a lot of their products are, because they were originally designed to be sold and used in China, are much more appropriate for a developing economy than, say, American or even European goods. And then I think the Belt and Road is a very ambitious program to actually build a sort of China-centered economic system to, in contrast to what has existed, which was basically an American-centered world economy, and to replace it with a more Chinese-centered one. And I think even beyond the formal Belt and Road, you can see that in terms of the biggest trading partner for most countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America is actually China, and is no longer the United States. So that's the main places. So that's how I see Belt and Road.
No, that's interesting. So we're winding down here, unfortunately, and we could talk for quite a while because there's a lot. There's a whole world economy out there, but I want to thank you first for being our guest on Fight Back Radio, Masao. But before we before we end, I want to give you a chance if there's anything here that we haven't covered or anything you want to raise here before we end the interview. This would be a good time.
Well, I guess one thing, I do write economic articles for Fight Back News. And I just wrote an article today's Sunday. So I wrote it late Friday night on the latest unemployment report that just came out on Friday. And so I'd like to, if people are interested in that, you can go to Fight Back News and titles unemployment rate ticks up in November. And that would be just fightbacknews.org. And you'll, at least for now, because there's multiple new articles coming up every day, you can find my unemployment article on the home page. So I'll just leave that with a little plug. If I didn't really talk about unemployment, but you can read about it in Fight Back News.
Okay, and we'll put that in the show notes as well, so people can find it there as well. So yeah, so thank you so much for being our guest, Masao Suzuki. Yes. Okay, so that was Masao Suzuki, and it's he was our first academic, I think, ever on Fight Back Radio. We've been doing this for 2.5 years. I know when we started, we said we're not going to have a lot of academics like some other left-wing podcasts do, which I have nothing against that. I listen to a lot of them, but we wanted to be more a community activist, summations and things like that, and I said we'd have some, and it's been till now. But Professor Suzuki is an appropriate first one because he also is a community activist. He's been involved in the immigrant rights community, and I know we've got a number of requests even before this is being released to have him back to talk about immigrant rights, and we might do that. I'm not sure. But we will have people back to talk about immigrant rights as Trump gets ready to take office. This is a big issue, and so the immigrant, he's talking about DACA, getting rid of people that are here temporarily on humanitarian visas or work visas. He wants to repeal the 14th Amendment, or at least reinterpret it, maybe not repeal it, but and this is really dangerous because it's getting. These are the amendments that were passed right after the Civil War and dealing with the aftermath of slavery. So it's worrisome that he might do that. And even just, do the people say, well, I don't have anything against immigrants. It's just one of those that don't do it right. Well, think about the Haitians that he's been talking about, accusing of eating pets, etc. Those are people that were recruited by corporations to come to Ohio to work legally. And so, we have to deal with all this. We're not taking this stuff lying down. We're not just saying, oh, Trump's an evil person, which clearly he is. We're organizing, we're fighting back, and I know the Fight Back Radio listeners are doing that, and I'm proud to stand with you. We're going to be doing protesting for the next 4 years starting right now, but I want to circle for everybody in your calendars. January 20th is we're going to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, and we're going to protest at all over the country against Donald Trump as he gets inaugurated. So raising up Dr. King to criticize President Trump seems appropriate. So you find out where the protest is in your city. Go to it. Tell your friends about it. This is important. And listen to Fight Back Radio. We're going to have activists who are organizing the fight back against the political repression, which no doubt will come. Workers' rights, police accountability, all the things that we've done in the past, we're going to continue to do and bring the best leaders in the country here to you to listen to on Fight Back Radio. So I appreciate all of our listeners, and hopefully you'll pass the word on to others. Also, tell me what you think about this, having an academic on. We've been trying a couple of new things on Fight Back Radio. Send me an email, richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. So that winds it up for today, though. I want to thank our production team, as always, Natalie Pranis, Dodd McColgan, Shane Tremley, and Vince Olson. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.